Hey, what's up? This is the Flyover Libertarian podcast, where two unimportant people from an unimportant place give you the opinion that you didn't ask for. I'm Iowancap, and this week I'm flying solo without Rural Rothbard. Last podcast, he got to do most of the talking, since I know diddly squat about Bitcoin. And instead, I'm going to be doing the interviewing because I've got my friend Isaac here. I don't even know what to call you because you've gone through so many Twitter handles that, like, I never remember which one you're on.
Yeah, you know what? Isaac is just fine because at this point,
It's just fine.
I mean, the only reason I'm not going by my first name now is because of an unfortunate and gross incident on Twitter. So I would normally be using my first name anyway, and I would probably just stick with that. But don't really want to out myself.
Unfortunate and gross, you know, you really didn't have to say that part. You could have just said an incident on Twitter. That's kind of assumed that it's unfortunate and gross.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
So before we get to the conversation, I want to let y'all know we were featured recently on the podcast This Week in Libera Pods. We got a message from the host maybe a week before it came out, or a partial week before it came out, and it kind of caught us both by surprise. We had no idea that we were on the radar of anyone. We thought we only had like 3 listeners, and I guess one of them has another podcast. So that was a pretty big honor, and go check them out this week in Libera Pods. We will include them on the show notes on flyover.page/episodes. Go find episode 6, and you'll find a link to that podcast. Go check them out and go follow them. They're doing a good work. I say, as one of the people being promoted by them, it's a good work to promote libertarian podcasts, especially small ones like ours. So we greatly appreciate it. Go support them. So Isaac,
hello.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, yeah. As has been said, my name is Isaac. I am a first-year college student at Redacted. Let's see. I'm a computer science and mathematics double major. Those have been passions of mine for a long time. And only as of recently have I really become someone who thinks a lot about politics. I've always had political opinions as far back as I can remember, especially towards the beginning of high school. So I started out kind of just a typical statist conservative type. I just kind of like my politics were my parents' politics. And I actually, through a high school friend, kind of was introduced into like podcasts and stuff like that and started listening. And we both kind of, throughout the course of 4 years, became more and more libertarian. And after a while, I passed him and became more libertarian than he was. And finally he came along, and now he's finally an ANCAP just like me. But so yeah, that's kind of where I am. I've been anti-state for let's see, it's 2020, about 2 years now.
Okay.
But I went through a pretty uneducated phase where I said a bunch of stupid stuff before I actually knew what I was talking about.
Don't we all?
Oh yeah.
You know, I think it's funny because your journey sounds a lot like mine, except mine was a little bit later.
Oh yeah.
You know, like I was a neocon well into college, and then I was through thoughtful conversations with some progressives.
Oh wow.
Who back then were pretending to be civil libertarians, because that's the way that they could go after George W. Bush. And through that, they made me think about some things that I really just couldn't get past, and eventually I became somewhat libertarian. And it was the same sort of thing, as that I actually had a friend who kind of dove in to libertarianism before me, and then I asked him a bunch of questions, and he gave me some info, and I think he probably wouldn't be offended to say that, yeah, I went further than him too. I just kind of, because I'm not a guy who, I'm a guy who I'm either all in or I'm not in at all. Like, you know what I mean? There's not a lot of things that I have moderate opinions on. Yeah. I either don't care or I'm super in, you know?
Oh yeah. Funny thing is, I tried to do that with minarchy for, the 6-month minarchist period. I tried to make it like its own thing where I could somehow claim it was the all-in libertarianism. And I think for a little while I even tried to claim that ANCAP wasn't even meaningfully libertarian because I wanted that term for myself. But I grew out of it finally. But like, unfortunately, instead of going straight into, really reading the Austrians and having informed opinions, I just really kind of went crazy and spouting off nonsense at first until I finally actually figured out that there's a political theory behind this. Yeah, because when I first started using the term anarchist, I could not tell you who Rothbard was. I had no idea about the Austrian School of Economics. So like, this means that even in my minarchist period, I didn't even know who like Ron Paul or Rothbard were. Like, it was kind of just a position I held to and tried to argue for it, but I think it was really mostly about labels at that point. And it was only after I had been identifying as an anarchist for maybe a month that I finally started learning about Rothbard. And to this day, I still haven't read a full work of Rothbard or Hoppa, but I've been around people who are really well educated on both of them. And so I pretty much have absorbed a ton of Rothbard and Hoppa from them. And, stuff from Ron Paul too. But I'm pretty well acquainted with their thought, and I am going to try to dive into one of Hoppa's economic works soon here.
You know what someone told me to do is that I should start with Rothbard, then go to Mises, then finish with Hoppa. Like that's what someone told me to do. They said that basically, Rothbard does a lot of his own stuff, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff, and in some ways he does build on Mises, but he's also an amazing expositor of Mises. And so then you get through Rothbard, and then you feel like you've got a good idea. Then it's kind of like you've got a lot of Rothbard's depth, and then you kind of add Mises into that. So all the things that Rothbard explained, you get the original context and things like that. And then you're ready for Hoppa, because Hoppa is just so stinking smart, and he really is building beautifully on the Rothbardian tradition, but he is a philosopher.
Oh yeah,
and everything that means. And so he's just a hardcore thinker, and that's really where I think there's a lot of misunderstandings. Is that there's a lot of internet Hoppians, who I maybe don't even get Hoppa at all.
Oh yeah.
And then unfortunately that gets to become like people judge Hoppa on some of the Hoppians, and then people are like, I'm never gonna give Hoppa a chance. But he's just a really smart guy.
Yeah.
And some people wouldn't give him a chance anyway because he's very unabashedly rightist.
Yeah. Oh, that's probably one of the big things, is that a lot of the socially center or milquetoast libertarians, you mention Hoppa and they're like, oh, that guy's like a right wing, he's probably like fascist or something. And I mean, I can understand like some of the internet Hoppians are statists, but it's not like any of the sort of people I hang around. Like, if you actually know Hoppa and believe what he says, you're not going to end up a statist. But if you misunderstand what he says, as lots of people do, you could very easily end up a statist. If you hear just nothing but physical removal and helicopter jokes all the time, well, of course you're going to probably think Hoppa's a statist.
Yeah.
But those are just jokes.
Yeah. And that's the thing, I was talking to, maybe I shouldn't talk about this. I was talking to a particular Twitter personality that I've been following, and I was talking to them on Twitter, and they were talking about how they had gotten some flack for some of the jokes that they've been making, and about helicopters. And there's like, my gosh, like there's something really frustrating about even libertarians who are ostensibly, in some sense, Misesian or Rothbardian, who are like, do you really not get that these are jokes? Like, I don't actually want to throw communists out of helicopters. Like, this this is a joke. We're all memeing here. It's even worse when it's a meme page that will not be named that is playing this sort of oh, can you believe the jokes that these guys are making? You're a meme page, bro.
Yeah.
This is what we do. Yeah. We make these stupid jokes.
Right.
And hopefully along the way we make some people think about it.
Yeah.
About stuff. Like do I really think that do I really want to go out and start killing communists? No. I actually have a friend from high school who's a communist. I'm not going to go kill him. But it does make people think. On the way, hopefully we can get them to think, why is communism so bad? Mm-hmm. Why is this something that is so terrible? Why did Pinochet view them as such a terrible enemy? Like, is it just that they've unfortunately been associated with these great, terrible authoritarianism and these terrible examples of famine and starvation? Or is there something actually inherently in the view that is violent?
Exactly.
And I don't think I need to convince you that that's exactly what it is. Yeah. There's something inherently violent about it. And as a libertarian, and this is really what Hoppa gets at, is that libertarians cannot be, we can't tolerate an inherently coercive ideology.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of what makes us libertarians.
Yeah, and it's precisely what people don't get is exactly what you're saying is like how bad communism is. Because you think, okay, well, communism, it just doesn't turn out very well, or, maybe it's what I heard from middle school, especially, was, well, it sounds nice on paper, but then it really just doesn't work out.
Until you read Mises, then you're like, it doesn't even sound good on paper.
Yeah, exactly. But when you really start to look at communist rhetoric and how they talk about literally killing landlords and just mass acts of murder and violent revolution and all these just sick things, you start to see, okay, I can understand why if you had a lot of people saying these same things and these were the communists that you knew in your society, these are very violent people. These aren't just, your liberal or conservative online who, in a sense, they're coercive because, they're statists and they want the state to implement their, policies at the expense of others. But they're not just that sort of normie statist. They are extremely pro-violence individuals with very, very few exceptions. I followed a guy for a while who was he's a Catholic, but he kind of associates with some left-wing ideas. I don't think that necessarily precludes him from being a Christian, but anyway, he was a pacifist communist for a while, where he did not advocate any violence, but communism as the sort of end goal was what he wanted. And I think you kind of have to live in a state of cognitive dissonance if that's your viewpoint, because communism really does take mass coercion to implement.
Or maybe not maybe even just I guess I could get that, and I'm willing to entertain that, even that possibility of no, really what we just want is a world in which people work together. Mm-hmm. Which I guess what makes me a rightist and a conservative libertarian is that I just do not have that kind of optimism in the human nature. And we're both Christians here, so this side of Christ's return, I don't have that kind of optimism about human nature.
Right, yeah.
I think people are going to grasp and seek to seize, and this is kind of where, it's not that I just love rich, greedy people, it's that I acknowledge the existence of greed, and I see does communism survive greed? I don't think it can.
Oh, absolutely not.
But capitalism can, and in fact, can work in spite of it, or even aim it in a direction that, in spite of itself, does build up the society that it's receiving from.
Right. And I totally agree with that. That capitalism can take a bad force that's present in certain humans more than others. And when you have capitalism, that directs their greed to actually end up doing good. And it can still end up in doing some bad things. I'm not saying that exploitation never ever happens under a free market system. It's still possible.
Absolutely.
But under a communist system, it's inevitable that the greedy people, not all of them, but the greedy people who have positions of power are going to be able to, have their way. Like, you're just deciding that, okay, we're going to have a couple of greedy people who now have a ton of power, like, and get to make decisions about the economy. And I mean, just look at Stalin. Like, what happened with all that? He took out like a ton of people in his country. I think, what's the figure, like 27 million or something? And not only did he mass murder citizens, but he also killed people in his own regime and replaced them, and would like make them disappear in photos of them that exist. Like, he was communism doesn't eliminate greed. And I can understand when some people talk about how capitalism, foments greed. I don't entirely disagree with that. I'm not ever going to say that capitalism can't allow a person's greed to increase. But I mean, like I said, you have to then go look and say, okay, well, would communism stop that? If they were in the same position that they're in a communist society, what would change, right? Would they really have any less, or do any less harm? And so it's just ridiculous thinking. It's trying to take a force that is independent of your external circumstances for the most part, and pretend like it's a result of the external system. It's just ridiculous.
And of course, there is a way that communism can stamp out greed. It's that if you have nothing, you can't become greedy. So, but we've been talking a little bit about this, but I'm talking about how I have these rightist sympathies, and I'm talking about it as something separate, I guess, from my libertarianism. But we hooked up and talked a little bit before going on about some topics you want to discuss, and you're willing to go further on this point, that you, at least in your message you sent to me, are willing to say that libertarianism is inherently right-wing.
Yes.
And so we should fight leftist movements within the movement. So tell me about this.
Absolutely. So I definitely would assert that libertarianism, properly understood, is inherently right-wing. And this mostly comes from the understanding that being right-wing is about supporting proper hierarchies in society. Whereas leftism or egalitarianism is aimed towards eliminating hierarchy as much as possible. Now, usually they say unjust hierarchies, but you ask them, well, what's an unjust hierarchy? And they'll basically say all kinds of stuff about capitalism is a bad hierarchy, the family is a bad hierarchy. So they'll basically tell you everything conservatives value is a bad hierarchy that needs to be destroyed. And now that doesn't apply to everyone who would call themselves like a left libertarian, but all left libertarians support the minimization of certain hierarchies that are in fact a result of the free market and a result of liberty, really. So in the end, I think that leftist ideas, or the supposed left libertarian idea of free market socialism, is just a pipe dream. It doesn't make sense. It's a contradiction in terms, because if you have liberty, if you have the right to free association, if you have the right to voluntary transactions, economically speaking, you're going to get a right-wing system. You're going to get a system of properly ordered hierarchy in society. Now, of course, originally, right-wing ideology did not have much to do with liberty in the beginning, when that term was first being formulated, but it was more focused on, because it comes from the right wing of French Parliament, who wanted to maintain kind of the aristocratic order, or monarchic. I don't remember exactly which of those, but they wanted to maintain the hierarchy. So it originated in a statist context.
Our boy Bastiat was sitting on the left.
Right, exactly. However, the reason I argue we should maintain the label of right wing is because we still do want to maintain those hierarchies. Now, we don't want to maintain the exact same set of hierarchies that they did. We don't want a sort of statist system that is imposed unnatural hierarchies. We want natural order, as some of my Hoppian friends would say, is we want to have a return to hierarchies that naturally emerge, and we want them to be, part of this sort of private property order, this order that's based, or the social order that is very much based on the institution of private property and the protection thereof. Like, not just, I respect private property, but using force to protect people's property and such. That creates a system of hierarchy. And the reason that is because, it's just natural, right? If you let a bunch of people kind of do their own thing, you have natural elites that rise to the top naturally, and you have people who are maybe less capable of handling large groups of people or large economic situations like CEOs are capable of doing, and they handle lower level jobs. Not to say that they're less, but just that they shouldn't be at a higher place in the hierarchy where they're managing a greater group of people. So this sort of natural order would emerge, and that's why the phrase natural order is used, because it literally is a natural ordering of things. And so the question is, well, if we support hierarchies like that, natural hierarchies, then why do we oppose the state? And the answer is really that it's an unnatural hierarchy, and that it distorts good natural orders and good natural hierarchy. As we see in our society today, it's done everything to undermine the natural order of the market, and it's beginning to try to erode the natural order of the family. In fact, that's an understatement. It's been doing that for a little while now, for years, decades even. And I suppose somebody would probably want receipts for that, and I would just point them to the way the welfare state is constructed to specifically favor non-family forms of organization, which has, by the way, as a side note, has totally destroyed the Black community in particular.
Yes.
And so yeah, really, it's the enemy of natural hierarchy. It's the enemy of natural order. And so that's why we oppose it, because we support that natural order and that natural hierarchy, which is very much a right-wing value.
And I would say, when I say, I'm a rightist or I'm a conservative, that does not mean that I am endorsing everything that calls itself right-wing or conservative. Even as when I say I'm a libertarian, I'm certainly not endorsing everything that calls itself libertarianism.
Right.
And so there's a point at which we say, yeah, we must be right-wing, but we don't need to be every kind of right-wing.
Exactly.
Like there's just it's like this problem, like you were talking about how when you first come into when a lot of people first come into libertarianism, there's this general vague sense of anti-authoritarianism, right? Mm-hmm. You just come in, you've got this vague sense of what it means to be a libertarian, because really until you've sat in I guess you could say, until you've sat in the libertarian room for a while, you're not hearing all the conversations going on in there. Mm-hmm. It's the same way with the right wing. Like, until you've sat in the right wing for long enough, you don't see, well, yeah, there are some people who what they want to conserve is a super hierarchical, a violent hierarchical system. Like they want to preserve the monarchy, or they want to preserve the Republican system, or there's, honestly, there's a point where, Michael Malice's quote comes in where there's a lot of people, what they want to conserve is progressivism 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It always depends. And that's why, it's so funny that as the left sheds people, they come over to the right. It's because they want to conserve something. Mm-hmm. And that is what the left was a few years ago.
Right.
But they're not really, and that's why there's sort of a danger in the way the right does just sort of take every cast off. You want to take them in, but then say, and also see, this is why we were saying this back then to you.
Yeah.
There's a point at which we do have to listen to the old conservatives. Mm-hmm. Even though I might say, some of them are obviously trying to preserve a statist system, and I want to say back to them, well, this is inherently violent, and this is not going to do what you think it's going to do. But there's some things that the old conservatives would say of like, any change comes with unintended consequences, and we should be aware of that whenever we try to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a wise caution that the right can give us,
Yeah. It's definitely something that I've seen in the right over the last couple of years. It's when somebody calls themselves a conservative, you really just can't know what that means. It could mean everything. It could mean anything from like a borderline alt-right sort of socialism works if you have just white people type, to somebody who's like basically the 5 years ago leftist. I mean, I know when I would have called myself a conservative, if you asked me things about like, what do you think about this era from the progressive, this policy from the progressive era, I would have been like, oh, that sounds nice, I would have been like, oh yeah, well, I guess we need that. And I would have been like, oh, well, the free market is good, but let's have all this regulation. And I would have sounded just like a progressive era type person, very much not anti-egalitarian or pro market hierarchy. It was exactly that sort of milk toast, middle of the road, not even really right wing in a lot of ways.
It's said a lot, and it's maybe exaggerated a little bit, but there is a serious argument to be made for the fact that neoconservatism is probably more Trotskyite than it is Kirkian.
Oh yeah, big time. And people will ask, well, what's your proof for that? Because I hear it all the time. And you call somebody like Charlie Kirk communist or something. Not necessarily just him in particular, but like George Bush, definitely. And people say, what are you talking about? Like, or you get some of these people on Twitter, and I know a couple of particularly bad examples where they're just like, they self-identify as neocons, and they're like, I'm anti-communist. And I'm like, no, you literally basically are a communist in a meaningful sense. And people say, well, what do you mean by that? And we just say, well, look at what Trotsky said about war and the struggle for democracy. Like, he wanted this worldwide constant struggle for democracy until, the whole world is basically converted to this sort of democratic system that is a step along the path to communism. And what do you hear from neoconservatives every time you question our intervention in the Middle East? Well, it's just the struggle for freedom and democracy, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Same rhetoric.
It's the sort of left-wing messianism that Thomas Sowell would talk about, that the messianic vision of the left. And really what's weird is that I don't even think Sowell would see the fact that he's applying that same, because I think he's somewhat pro-interventionist himself, that it's weird that he probably wouldn't see that he himself has that sort of messianic tendency when it comes to, well, we had to free Iraq.
Yeah. I mean, they're just so blind to what they're doing. They see all these things, and they hear all the what the corporate media is telling them about, well, here's reasons we need to go and basically kill a bunch of people and break a bunch of things in this other country, and people just drink it like Kool-Aid. They take it all in. They don't really question it. They just say, oh, well, look at what these reporters said, guess we really do need to go intervene there. Well, no, we don't. You're just
right.
You're just spouting off the establishment line. The establishment line is a lie. It's an outright lie, and the only reason it's being told is to serve their ends, to do what they want to do. They want to invade Iraq, so what are they going to do? Oh, well, they got weapons of mass destruction, which is an insane lie based off of truth, right? It's not entirely false that there were no weapons, but they were weapons that were given to them by the US. They were old and basically rotting away in some bunker somewhere, and they weren't even thinking of using them. And like I said, they were given to them by the US to fight who we were fighting at the time. And so they just will twist all this information and lie us into these wars. And the conservatives are all around the country. I've talked to people on Twitter who call themselves conservatives, and they'll just say, well, we support the military. And so and they'll maybe try to cop out like, well, I guess I don't necessarily support everything I do, but I support the troops. Well, if you're going to unconditionally support the troops like that, you're just saying you support everything they do. And every time you criticize what they're doing, it's treated as a personal attack on every single member of the military. And it's just not true. It's just not true that we're attacking all veterans. I have military people in my family, a very big portion of them on one side of my family. And I don't hate any of them. I don't hate any of my uncles who were in the Air Force. I love them very much. But that doesn't mean I think that the organization they were a part of was doing a good thing in their various conflicts in the Middle East. It's just ridiculous, and it's definitely little more than an attempt to try to make the anti-war position seem absurd or anti-American or unpatriotic. Which, I mean, I guess if questioning the state or questioning the government is unpatriotic, then I guess I am. But the original usage of the word patriot is kind of rooted in anti-statism and questioning the government, really. So I don't even really see how you can make that connection.
Even in the sense of like, my Twitter pinned tweet. I love America. There's nowhere else I'd rather live. There's nothing wrong with America that abolishing the United States wouldn't fix.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite tweets because it really expresses what I like. And that leads me to a different discussion, which we'll probably discuss a little later with one of the topics we got, but separating nation and state. There's a difference between the nation and the state. And it's good to love your nation, to love the culture you have, to love the people around you, and to love your neighbor. But it's not a good thing to love the state. And the thing that we've been taught, in public schools and in just general civil society is the state is responsible for the nation, and the nation depends on the state. And in reality, it's really just the other way around. The state is a parasite on the nation. The state undermines the very concept of nation in many ways. And one of those ways is, once again, something we'll be talking about in a little while. But no, it really does things to destroy natural nations and culture. So I really think that one of the things we have to do as libertarians, introduce people to this idea that there is a difference between the nation and the state.
Absolutely, right there with you.
And that, I'll add, was something that when I was going through my kind of unserious stage, or my uneducated phase, or my just kind of blind phase at the beginning, whatever you'll call it, is something that I tried to do as well. I tried to bind the concept of nation and state, and tried to condemn the concept of the nation by condemning the state. And after a while, once I kind of got pulled back into a place of right-wing sanity, I realized, no, the nation is a good thing. I should be trying to preserve this, and preserve culture, and preserve social coherence, and not destroy it. Because one of the reasons I should be against the state is because it undermines. So not only do we have to kind of introduce this as a concept to civil society, is this separation between nation and state, but we also really have to do work deprogramming this idea among libertarians, because it definitely seems to be a concept among libertarians. You start talking about the nation, and they start screeching to you about collectivism, and you're just being basically a communist. And it's like, no. One way I describe myself is that I am politically individualist and socially communitarian. There is a communitarianism about humanity that is a very good thing, and it's a gift from God. But that doesn't mean that we turn to collectivist politics. And on the other hand, we don't want to give up our social coherence and turn to this sort of individualistic, atomized culture, which I think we actually have that right now. We have social policy in government. We have this sort of political collectivism and philosophical individualism. Dividing society into individual people. Go and chase your dreams. Do what pleases you. So we literally have it flipped. We have this systematic undermining of individual rights, but at the same time, this sort of apotheosis of the individual, culturally speaking. And that's why we are where we are today.
I mean, it's kind of that whole it's somewhat of an irony that I've noticed as well, is that collectivism politically creates atomism socially. Like there's when your main way of being provided for is getting a check cut to you from the government, then you have no reason to work with your neighbor, because your neighbor doesn't need to help you through the hard and lean times. You don't need to lean on your neighbors, or as I've often seen, you become just a leech off of everyone, and you're not actually supporting anyone. There's no give and take. There's only take. Well, we're going to bring this episode to a close, but Isaac and I were not done talking, and I'm telling you, it got even more interesting. So come back next episode as I continue my conversation with Isaac. I'm Iowancap, and this has been the Flyover Libertarian Podcast.